The story begins with a little girl named Hope van Dyne, who is happily playing inside her home. Her world is completely normal. To her, her mom and dad are the greatest heroes in the world. But on that very day, her parents, Hank Pym and Janet van Dyne, suddenly begin preparing to leave in a hurry. They explain to Hope that they have to go on an extremely important mission and won't be able to return for a few days. Hope starts crying and tries to stop her mother from leaving, but Janet hugs her lovingly and tries to make her smile. Finally, both of them say goodbye to her and leave the house. But they had no idea that this wasn't just another mission. It was about to become the final decision that would change their family's destiny forever. At that very moment, an enemy nation had launched a nuclear missile. If it reached its target, thousands of innocent people would lose their lives. So Hank and Janet immediately put on their Ant-Man suits and raced toward the missile. Flying through the air, they somehow managed to land on top of it and try to stop it. But they soon realized that disabling the missile from the outside is impossible. There is only one way left to get inside. They would have to shrink so small that they could pass between the metal particles of the missile itself. The problem was that if someone shrank that small, there was no guarantee they would ever return. Hank wants to take the risk himself. But at that exact moment, the regulator on his suit malfunctions. Now he has no other choice. Without any hesitation, Janet shuts off her own regulator. Hank desperately tries to stop her. But Janet simply smiles and says, "Tell Hope that I love her very much." The very next moment, she keeps shrinking smaller and smaller. She enters the missile and successfully disables it. The missile crashes into the ocean, saving the entire world from a devastating disaster. But the price of that victory was enormous. Janet was lost in the quantum realm forever. Sometime later, Hank tells his little daughter the heartbreaking truth. Her mother is never coming back. From that day on, Hope grows up without her mother. Meanwhile, Hank completely buries himself in his work. Years pass, but he is never able to forget Janet. The story then shifts to the present day. Hope is now all grown up and working alongside her father in a secret laboratory. That's when Hank reveals a secret he has been hiding for years. He explains that when Scott Lang returned alive from the quantum realm some time ago, it gave him hope for the first time. Maybe Janet had survived as well. Holding on to that hope, he built a special machine, the quantum tunnel. If the machine works properly, they may finally be able to bring Janet back after 30 years. At first, Hope can hardly believe it. But when she sees the hope in her father's eyes, she too begins longing to see her mother again. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Scott Lang is still under house arrest. Only 3 days remain before his sentence ends. Inside his house, he's playing an imaginary heist game with his daughter, Cassie. Using toys, ants, and tiny household objects, the two pretend they're breaking into a high-tech building to steal the world's most valuable treasure. Scott wants to make every moment with his daughter special, because he knows he missed a huge part of her childhood over the past few years. After the game ends, Cassie tells him that he's the best dad in the world. Scott smiles and hugs her tightly, but their happiness doesn't last very long. A short while later, FBI agent Jimmy Woo arrives at Scott's house with his team. As always, he thoroughly inspects the entire house and warns Scott that if he contacts Hank Pym or Hope van Dyne in any way, his entire deal will be canceled, and he could end up spending at least 20 years in prison. Without hesitation, Scott tells him that he cut ties with both of them a long time ago. For him, the only things that matter now are his daughter and his freedom. But that night, Scott has a dream. It feels less like a dream, and more like someone else's memory. The next morning, that dream is about to change his entire life. The moment Scott wakes up, his mind is completely confused. The dream felt so real that he simply can't forget it. In the dream, he saw everything through the eyes of a little girl who was playing hide and seek with her mother. Everything felt so unbelievably real that it seemed as if he was witnessing someone else's memories, not his own. Scott first tries to dismiss it as nothing more than his imagination. He even starts dialing Hank Pym's number, but then he stops himself, thinking it would be foolish to bother them over nothing more than a strange dream, so he decides not to call. But just a few moments later, he suddenly hears a familiar voice behind him. Scott turns around and is completely stunned. Standing right in front of him is Hope van Dyne. Before Scott can even understand what's happening, he is knocked unconscious and taken to a secret laboratory. When he wakes up, he finds himself standing in front of Hank and Hope. The first thing he says in panic is that if the FBI finds out he's here, his life will be ruined. But at this moment, Hank and Hope are far more concerned about his mind than his legal problems. Hope shows him a massive machine. It is the quantum tunnel they spent years building. Hank explains that they activated the machine for the very first time the previous night, For just a few seconds, a gateway to the quantum realm opened. But the system overloaded and shut down. Only a few minutes later, Scott called and described the exact dream he had. That was the moment Hank became convinced. It wasn't just a dream. He believes that when Scott returned from the quantum realm in the first Ant-Man movie, his mind somehow became connected to Janet. And when the tunnel was activated again, that connection awakened once more. Scott burst into laughter after hearing all of this. He says it sounds completely insane, but Hope begins asking him every tiny detail about the dream. She asks, "Where was the little girl hiding?" Scott answers, "Inside a red wardrobe." Hope asks another question. "Did that wardrobe have horses painted on it?" Scott freezes in shock, because he never told anyone about that detail. When he says yes, Hope's eyes begin to fill with tears. She explains that when she was little, her mother always hid her inside that same red wardrobe while they played. Only 2 people in the entire world knew about it. Her and her mother. Now there is no room for doubt. Janet is truly trying to contact them through Scott. Hank immediately decides that they must activate the quantum tunnel again. But to do that, they need an extremely important quantum component. And only one man has it. Sonny Birch. He secretly sells high-tech equipment on the black market and has helped Hank many times in the past. Hope gets ready to go and collect the part from him. Meanwhile, Scott repeatedly insists that he cannot be part of this mission. If he doesn't return home, the FBI will discover everything when they check his ankle monitor. Not only will he lose his freedom, he'll also be separated from his daughter Cassie for many years. But Hank reminds him of one simple thing. "You're not doing us a favor. You're paying back a debt." Scott knows that if Hank and Hope hadn't helped him the first time, he never would have become Ant-Man. Finally, with no other choice, he agrees to go with them. The 3 of them get into the car and head off to meet Sonny Birch. But they have absolutely no idea that the deal they believe is nothing more than a simple business transaction is about to introduce them to an enemy who doesn't fight with bullets, but with the very laws of physics themselves. Scott, Hope, and Hank arrive at Sonny Birch's luxurious restaurant. At first glance, everything appears perfectly normal. As always, Sonny greets them with a smile and politely invites them to sit down. But Hope has no time to waste. Without any formalities, she gets straight to the point. She asks him for the quantum component they need to restart their machine. Sonny quietly stares at them for a few seconds. Then the smile on his face slowly begins to fade. He tells them that he now knows everything. The woman he believed was named Susan is actually Hope van Dyne, and the man standing beside her is none other than the legendary scientist, Hank Pym. And that's not all. He also knows that Hank and Hope have been working on quantum technology for the past several months. Sonny says that if this technology truly works, it will become the most valuable discovery in the world. That's why he's no longer interested in simply selling them one component. He wants the entire technology. He even reveals that he already has billion-dollar buyers waiting. All Hank Pym has to do is become his business partner. But Hank and Hope's mission is far greater than any business deal. To them, every passing minute is priceless. Hope calmly says one last time, "Just give us our component." Sonny laughs and flatly refuses. Hope now realizes that talking isn't going to solve anything. The very next second, she instantly activates her suit. Within moments, the entire restaurant turns into a battlefield. Armed men attack from every direction, but Hope is simply too fast for them. One moment she shrinks to dodge bullets. The next she spreads her wings, flies through the air, and knocks another attacker to the ground. Scott watches the entire fight in complete amazement. He jokingly asks Hank, "You gave her wings and blasters too?" Hank casually replies, "I could have given them to you too." Scott immediately starts complaining that he never got technology that awesome. Eventually, Hope manages to secure the quantum component. The 3 of them are just about to leave when suddenly, something strange begins happening in the air around them. It feels as though an invisible person is moving all around them. Then, a mysterious figure suddenly appears. Her body keeps flickering, appearing and disappearing. Bullets pass straight through her. No one can even touch her. Before Hope has a chance to attack, the mysterious woman heads straight toward Hank's shrunken laboratory. Within seconds, the entire lab is in her hands, and the very next moment, she disappears without a trace. The 3 of them stand there in complete silence. Hank can't even process what just happened. Their entire quantum tunnel, all of their research, and their only hope of bringing Janet back was inside that tiny laboratory. If they don't recover it, 30 years of waiting will have been for nothing. With no other option left, they head straight to Luis's office. There, they tell him everything that has happened. At first, Luis reacts the way he always does, making jokes. But the moment he learns that Hank's entire lab has been stolen, he becomes serious as well. He suggests that if the lab has some kind of tracking system installed, they might still be able to locate it. Hank explains that he actually did install a tracker, but whoever stole the lab already knew exactly where the tracker was hidden, which means this wasn't an ordinary thief. Whoever it was had deep knowledge of Hank Pym's technology. Now, the biggest question wasn't the lab anymore. The biggest question was, who exactly was that mysterious woman who could walk through walls and somehow already knew them? After hearing Luis's suggestion, Hank thinks quietly for a few moments. Then one name suddenly comes to his mind: Bill Foster. He once worked alongside Hank at SHIELD. The two of them spent years researching quantum technology together, but for some reason their paths eventually separated. Now, asking Bill for help seems to be their last remaining hope. Without wasting any time, the three of them head to Bill Foster's university. At that moment, Bill is teaching a quantum physics class. As soon as the lecture ends, he notices Hank. The two men look at each other. But it's immediately obvious that the old rivalry between them is still alive. The conversation barely begins before the arguing starts. Bill sarcastically says that Hank always believed he was the greatest genius alive, and because of that arrogance, he pushed almost everyone around him away. Hank doesn't stay quiet either. He replies that he only distanced himself from people who weren't good enough for his work. Listening to the two of them argue, Scott looks completely exhausted. Then the conversation suddenly shifts towards something unexpected. Which one of them had achieved the biggest size during their experiments? Bill proudly says, "I grew to 21 feet. Scott smiles and replies, "I reached 65 feet. For the first time, a look of genuine surprise appears on Bill's face. But Hope immediately interrupts both of them. She reminds them that they didn't come here to settle old scores. They came to get their lab back. Bill thinks for a moment, then offers a solution. If they use the diffraction units from the original Ant-Man suit, they can build a new quantum tracker, and with that tracker, they should be able to locate the stolen lab. Hank agrees that the plan could work. But there's one problem. They no longer have the old suit. Scott slowly admits the truth. He had lied to Hank. When he claimed he destroyed the original suit, that wasn't true. He had actually shrunk it down and mailed it to Luis, so it could be used again if necessary. The moment Hank hears this, he completely loses his temper. He can't believe that the greatest invention of his life was mailed through the postal service like an ordinary package. But this isn't the time to be angry. Finding the suit is their top priority. When they arrive at Luis's office, the suit isn't there. Even Luis is shocked. Then Scott suddenly remembers something. A few days earlier, his daughter Cassie had taken the tiny suit to school, thinking it was some kind of trophy. Without wasting another second, the three of them rush straight to the school. In a hurry, Hank reactivates the old suit, but it still isn't working properly. The moment Scott puts it on, everything starts going wrong. 1 second, he shrinks to the size of a 5-year-old child. The next, he's back to normal. As he runs through the school hallways, his size keeps changing over and over again. Somehow, he manages to avoid teachers and students. Outside, Hope constantly guides him through the mission. Meanwhile, Hank desperately tries to fix the suit's malfunction. After several difficult moments, Scott finally recovers the suit. Now they have everything they need to build the tracker. A short time later, the new tracker is activated. It immediately locks onto a signal. The three of them rush to the location. Scott shrinks down and enters the building. Within seconds, he spots their miniature laboratory. Everything is going exactly according to plan. But just as he reaches out to pick up the lab, a calm voice suddenly speaks behind him. "Hi, I'm Ava." Scott turns around. Standing before him is the same mysterious woman, but the biggest surprise is still waiting. The very next moment, another person steps out of the shadows. The instant Hank sees him, the color drains from his face. It is none other than Bill Foster. Seeing Bill Foster standing beside Ghost leaves both Hank and Hope completely stunned. The man they came to for help is now standing against them. Scott can't understand why Bill betrayed them. Then the mysterious woman steps forward. In a calm voice, she introduces herself. Her name is Ava Starr. She then reveals the truth about her past, a truth so shocking that everyone standing there falls silent. Ava explains that her father, Elihas Starr, once worked alongside Hank Pym at SHIELD on quantum research. But one day, Hank accused him of stealing his research and had him fired. Determined to prove his innocence, Elihas tried to recreate the quantum experiment on his own, but the experiment went horribly wrong. A massive explosion occurred. Both of Ava's parents were killed instantly, but Ava survived. Although her life would never be the same again, her entire body became unstable. Every atom in her body constantly tears apart and reforms every single moment. Because of this, she can phase through walls and pass through solid objects. From the outside, it looks like an incredible superpower, but in reality, it is a painful curse that she suffers through every second of her life. Bill Foster finally explains everything. He tells them that after the accident, he was the one who took Ava in and raised her. He even designed a special suit for her, one that could keep her body stable, at least to some extent. But as time passed, her condition continued to get worse. Now, she doesn't have much time left. Bill believes that because Janet Van Dyne spent 30 years inside the quantum realm, her body must have absorbed an enormous amount of quantum energy. If that energy could somehow be transferred to Ava, it might save her life. But the greatest cost of that cure would be Janet's life. The moment Hank hears this, he is consumed by anger. He makes it absolutely clear. He came here to save his wife, not to sacrifice her. But Ava is no longer willing to back down. She wants to live, no matter whose life she has to take. Just then, Scott receives a text message on his phone. It simply says, "Gone." He immediately panics. He thinks his daughter Cassie must be in serious danger. After a long argument, Bill finally allows him to make a video call. But when Cassie answers, it turns out she's only looking for her soccer cleats. Scott lets out a huge sigh of relief. But he also realizes something. If he stays away from home much longer, everything he's worked for will be lost. At that very moment, Hank suddenly clutches his chest in pain. Hope quickly asks Bill for Hank's heart medication. After hesitating for a few moments, Bill agrees. As soon as Hank takes the medicine, he begins to recover. But even though he appears weak, his mind never stops working. The moment he gets an opportunity, he secretly starts changing the settings on the quantum tunnel. He knows that once the machine is activated, Janet may finally be able to contact them herself. A short while later, Bill and Ava step away to prepare the machine. Meanwhile, Hope opens up to Scott for the very first time. She admits she's afraid. She says, "If my mom really comes back after 30 years, will she even recognize me? Can someone stay the same after all that time?" Scott comforts her. He tells her that while he was in prison, the memories of his daughter Cassie were the only thing that kept him going. Then he says, "A mother never forgets her daughter." For the first time, a sense of peace appears on Hope's face. But in that very moment, Scott's phone rings again. This time, it's Luis, and the news he's about to deliver is about to shake the entire mission. The moment Scott hears the panic in Luis's voice, his expression changes. Luis explains that Sonny Birch's men captured him and injected him with a truth serum. Under its effects, he accidentally revealed everything, including the exact location of Hank, Hope, and Scott. And that's not all. The FBI is already on its way there. The moment everyone hears this, they're completely stunned. Hank immediately realizes they have no time left. If the FBI arrives, they'll never be able to activate the quantum tunnel. At the same time, Scott has his own problem. If the FBI goes to his house and finds him missing, his house arrest will be violated, and he'll be sent straight back to prison, left with no other choice. Scott asks Hank for the Ant-Man suit, so he can somehow make it home before it's too late. Hope becomes frustrated. She feels that even at the most critical moment, Scott is only thinking about himself. But Scott has no other option. He puts on the suit and rushes out. Meanwhile, Hank and Hope stay behind, trying to protect the quantum tunnel. Back at Scott's house, Cassie, her mother Maggie, and Jim Paxton are already there. Just then, Agent Jimmy Woo arrives with the entire FBI team. He's convinced that this time, Scott has finally broken the rules. But at the very last second, Scott manages to make it back to his room. He acts so naturally that even Jimmy Woo begins believing Scott never left the house. After checking every record, the FBI has no choice but to leave empty-handed. As he's leaving, Jimmy Woo even apologizes to Scott for doubting him. But at that very same time, another FBI team has already reached Hank and Hope. Both of them are arrested. For a moment, it seems as though the dream of saving Janet has come to an end. Scott is devastated when he hears the news. Just then, his daughter Cassie says something. That completely changes his perspective. She says, "Helping people is never the wrong thing to do." Then she smiles and adds, "You don't have to do it alone. You can be someone's partner." The moment Scott hears those words, he realizes that if he doesn't stand by his friends now, he'll never forgive himself. Meanwhile, even while sitting in FBI custody, Hank and Hope refuse to give up. Together, they come up with an incredibly risky escape plan. Using PIM particle technology, they shrink part of the jail wall and prepare to escape. The plan is just about to begin, when suddenly, A familiar voice calls out from behind them. What are you two still doing here? Both of them turn around. Standing there is Scott. He managed to fool the FBI and came back.
Now,
The three of them are finally together again, using clever teamwork. They successfully escape from FBI custody. Once they're outside, Hank reveals that after recovering the lab the first time, he secretly installed another hidden tracker inside it.
now,
They can head directly to wherever Ghost has taken the lab. A short while later, the tracker leads them straight to it. Meanwhile, Ghost has already begun the final stage of her plan. Her condition is getting worse with every passing minute. Bill Foster makes one last attempt to convince her that there may still be another way, but Ava firmly replies, I don't have time to wait. And the very next moment, the quantum tunnel begins powering up completely. Now only 2 hours remained. If Janet wasn't brought back within that time, the pathway to the quantum realm would shift again, and the next opportunity might not come for another 100 years. The moment Hank Pym had been waiting for over the past 30 years had finally arrived. The quantum tunnel was fully operational once again. Janet's location had already been found, but they had only one chance to reach her. If they missed this opportunity, the pathways of the quantum realm would change, and the next chance might not come for an entire century. Without wasting another second, Hank decides to enter the quantum realm himself. Hope tries to stop him. She had already lost her mother once, and now she couldn't bear the risk of losing her father too. But Hank simply smiles and says, This time, I'm bringing her home. With those words, he steps into the quantum tunnel. Meanwhile, outside, Scott and Hope stay behind to protect the machine. Suddenly, Ghost attacks again. Her condition has become far worse than before. Her body is constantly breaking apart, and the pain grows stronger every passing second. For her, this is no longer a fight to win, it's a fight to survive. Scott tries to stop her, but every attack passes straight through her, because Ghost keeps using her phasing ability. At that very moment, Luis arrives in his van. With the help of his aunts and his perfect timing, he manages to distract Ghost long enough, giving Scott and Hope the chance to protect the machine. Meanwhile, inside the quantum realm, Hank follows Janet's voice. At last, he reaches the place where she has been living alone for the past 30 years. The moment their eyes meet, time itself seems to stand still. The woman Hank believed he had lost forever is standing alive right in front of him. Without saying a single word, the two embrace each other. But there is no time for an emotional reunion. Janet immediately reminds Hank that they have very little time left to return. Without delay, the two of them head back toward the quantum tunnel. The moment Hank and Janet emerge from the tunnel, Hope sees her mother standing before her. Unable to hold back her emotions, she runs into Janet's arms. After 30 long years, mother and daughter are finally reunited. Hank lets out a deep sigh of relief. The family that had been torn apart by one sacrifice is finally together again. But in that very moment, Ghost appears before them. By now, her condition has become so severe that she can barely remain standing. The instant Janet sees her, she understands exactly what's happening, because Janet spent 30 years inside the quantum realm. Her body now contains quantum energy, powerful enough to help Ava. Without even a trace of hatred, Janet steps forward. She gently places her hand on Ava's face. Slowly, the quantum energy begins flowing from Janet's body into Ava's. Within seconds, for the very first time, Ava's body becomes completely stable. Her pain disappears. She can finally breathe like a normal human being. Seeing this, Bill Foster's eyes fill with relief as well. Meanwhile, Sonny Birch makes one final attempt to steal the lab and escape. But this time, Scott, Hope, and Luis chase after him together. A massive chase erupts through the city streets. One moment, the entire lab shrinks to the size of a suitcase. The next, cars suddenly grow into gigantic machines. Eventually, Sonny and all of his men are captured by the police. Bill Foster also surrenders himself to the authorities without resistance. Sometime later, Scott's house arrest officially comes to an end. At last, he is completely free. Meanwhile, Hank, Janet, and Hope sit together as a family for the first time in years. The hope that the entire world had given up on has finally reunited them once again. And with that, the incredible story of Ant-Man and the Wasp comes to an end. If you enjoyed this movie explanation, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next incredible story.